AC15 versus AC10. Which one do you choose? Hey everyone, welcome to this shootout between two budget-friendly notable amplifiers from Vox. These are two tube amps that harken back to some of the original Vox amps ever made. So we have the Vox AC10 versus the Vox AC15. For the love of all that is good in this world, don't say apples and oranges. This is a totally reasonable comparison. For no other reason other than the fact that many of you are thinking about getting one of these amps, might be going, which one do I get? You know, I kind of like the idea of the AC10. It's a little smaller and probably get it to drive a little louder, but is it loud enough? The AC15, is it too much for my needs? Is it still not enough for my needs? Do I need some of the extra features? I'm going to take care of you folks. We're going to go through this together. Now, for that intro, I was using a Fender Stratocaster for the rhythm. Obviously, you heard a little bit of the AC15's tremolo there. For the lead tones, I was using a Gibson Sg Classic that's newly loaded with Singletone P90s, which I'm really enjoying. Just a really nice P90 there. That's not sponsored, by the way. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the differences and some of the similarities. Now, first of all, they both have that kind of classic Vox tone to a certain extent. Vox, when it comes to their reissues, they're not quite where I want them to be. I'll be totally honest about that. They have a unique tone that does pay homage to the original Vox amps, but it's not quite there. It's not quite exactly. Notably, it tends to lack a little warmth compared to the original Vox amps, but they do something unique. They are fun amps that you can get great tones out of, and they're not terribly expensive. So we'll start with the Vox AC15. This one has been around for a bit longer, and this one's actually the second run in this sort of modern Vox series. It started with the Vox AC, so it's the Vox ACCC. It started with the Vox AC15 CC1. And then moved on to the Vox AC15 C1. The notable difference there is that the new version also has the normal channel. The CC1 only had a top boost channel. And this one gives you the two channels, but don't think of it like a channel switching amp. Some players do set up an A-B switch and kind of go back and forth between the two, but it's not like your classic channel switching amp though. The normal channel is a bit warmer, a bit rounder, and it doesn't get quite as much gain. The top boost channel really snarls and can even get into some like kind of buzzsaw, really grinding sort of territory. Other notable features of this one are you have the classic Vox tone cut, you also have real spring reverb, and you have tremolo, and the reverb and the tremolo are foot switchable. The AC15 C1 has two different options for speakers. The one that you're listening to right now has a Celestion greenback in it. You can also get the C2, C1, C1X that has the Alnico blue, which is more like what an original Vox would have had. The AC10 is much more stripped down. The AC15 is 15 watts. The AC10 is 10 watts, if you could guess that, and it has a 10-inch speaker. Now that has a Celestion V-type speaker. Quality-wise, the speaker's probably not quite as good, but there's some things that I actually like about it. So we're going to talk about the speakers in a minute. This one is much more stripped down. This one gives you volume, gain, treble, bass, and reverb. Now the reverb on this one is digital. It is not a real spring reverb. And it's a much more straightforward kind of plug and slug type amplifier. Much quicker to dial in, doesn't give you as many features. So we're talking about the speakers now. One of the things you might have noticed that surprised me actually in putting these two amps back to back with each other was how much kind of warmer and darker I thought the AC10 sounded. I think a lot of that has to do not only with the fact that it's a 10-inch speaker, but that it's a V-type speaker, which is a little lower on the speaker grading, so to speak, than the greenback. That being said, I'm actually not crazy about a Celestion greenback in a Vox amp. I'm not going to say anything bad about a greenback. It's one of the most classic speakers of all time. But the trouble with the greenback is that in order to sound full and warm and get some good body to it, the AC15 really needs to be loud. If you noticed in the beginning, I mentioned that the AC10 sounded a little warmer, a little darker. The AC15, it sounded a little brittle. Now, at the beginning, it was probably at about rehearsal volume. Later on, I am going to play them both at more gigging volume, and you'll hear that the AC15 sounds a lot fuller, but that's also a lot louder. So if you're a bedroom player, or if you're working in a home studio, or even if you're just working on stages where you can't get it that loud, if you're going to be mic'd up all the time, the AC15, you might not be able to get it quite to the point where you want. That being said, it has a lot more articulation than the AC10. It's much clearer. And I had the tone cut up above noon. I had the tone cut up pretty high, which, by the way, works backwards than a typical presence knob. The more you turn the tone cut up, the more it cuts the tone. And so the darker it gets, if you roll it all the way back, it gets much clearer and brighter and articulate. The AC10, I actually expected to be more articulate and edgier because it doesn't have a tone cut. But again, because of that 10-inch speaker and because of the fact that the speaker is probably not quite as good, doesn't have as much fidelity to it, it's a little bit warmer and darker. In some ways, I preferred that. In some ways, I felt like that kind of nails that old Vox warmth. If it just had a little more articulation, it might be great. I really think either of these amps could benefit from a speaker upgrade. Many of you might know that I had a Weber Blue Dog in the AC15 for a while, and I do massively prefer that speaker in this amp. I switched it back simply to do this shootout because it wouldn't really make sense to do a shootout with an aftermarket speaker that wouldn't come in it. But I much prefer the Weber Blue Dog. I really think either of them would sound better with a speaker upgrade. Now, the reverb, I actually think the digital reverb holds up surprisingly well. Tremolo, if you need tremolo, AC15 has tremolo. If you don't need tremolo, then you're not really missing out on anything on the AC10, and of course you can use a tremolo pedal. I think both of these amps excel as pedal platforms, and we are going to do a combination of tones today, both straight from the amp and also using pedals.
You shouldn't use pedals in amp demos, man. Just go straight into the amp. That's all we want to hear. That's all we want to hear.
You're pedal shaming. How dare you? Seriously though, not only is Vox one of the most notable companies in history when it comes to the integration of guitar effects, these also work great as a pedal platform. So I'm going to give you hopefully a pretty even amount of tones using both just the amps and boosting them in different ways with pedals. And right now we are going to start to get back into some tone here. We're going to start with various clean tones, and what I want to do first is give you just a really nice clean tone with a Fender Telecaster. I'm going to turn the reverb up for that. Now at the beginning I was playing obviously the AC10 just has the one channel, so that's what you were hearing. For the AC15, you were hearing it in the top boost. Now as we do more tones, I'm not going to do both on the AC15. I'm going to kind of give you one that I think matches up pretty well to the AC10, kind of in the interest of time. So we're going to start with a nice clean tone with a Telecaster, and I'm going to be in the normal channel of the AC15. We're going to do clean tone with a reverb up on both, so you can hear a little bit of a combination of the reverb. And then I'm going to boost it with a Vick Audio Tree of Life Overdrive, which is one of my favorite overdrive pedals. We're going to do that into this clean channel with the reverb just back a little bit. But so you can hear how it sounds if you're going totally clean and then getting all your drive from a pedal. So let's start with this clean tone. All right, for another clean tone, we are going to go kind of demographic specific here, because one of the classic Vox tones is the 1960s jangly rhythm tone. And I do happen to be a Rickenbacker fan, and I have a Rickenbacker 620 loaded with Gemini pickups. So what you're about to hear is a clean jangly tone. Now for this one, I am going to go into the AC15 top boost. We're going to start just with the amp tone, and then in order to really get a great 60s jangle, in my not so humble opinion, I think it sounds a lot better if you use a compressor pedal. So we're going to give you an example of just the amp clean tone, and then I'm also going to kick on a Keeley compressor plus, and you'll hear how it really kind of affects the tone and affects the jangle. So we're going to hear the AC10 and the AC15 top boost for that classic rhythm sound. Right, now we're going to get into some overdrive, and I'm going to go back to the SG Classic with the Singletone P90s, and we're going to go just straight in for just a nice kind of rock rhythm tone. I don't have the gain all the way up, but it's pretty high up there, and it's a little bit louder. It's not quite to gig volume yet, but this is a little bit louder, and so we're just going right in, not getting anything from pedals here, and just getting a cool rock rhythm with an SG. Now for this tone on the AC15, I'm still using the top boost channel, so let's hear these back to back. All right, now I'm going to switch to the Stratocaster, and I'm going to do a combination of things here. I'm going to give you the tone of the amp, but I also have a Catalinbread Belle Epoch delay going on for a classic kind of tape delay going straight into the amp. By the way, neither of these amps have effects loops, so if you want to use effects, particularly things like delay, reverbs, modulations, keep that in mind. If you're getting drive from the amplifiers, any of your pedals are going to go straight in. If you bump up to the AC30, you do get an effects loop, but these two do not have effects loops. So you're going to hear that. It's the same tone, but obviously with the Stratocaster, that's got Lust for Tone Monterey pickups. Obviously with the Stratocaster, that's going to be a lower gain kind of sound. I'm not driving it as hard as with the P90s. And then I'm going to kick on a True-Fi Rangemaster. Of course, one of the classic Vox tones involves an old treble booster. So we're going to kick it on with that so that you can hear how these sound with kind of a classic pedal setup. An Echoplex style delay and a great treble booster. So let's hear them both in that sound. Now, for the last tone, I'm going to get it up to gig volume. These are both pretty loud here. These would more than compete with a drummer. Keep in mind that neither of these amps would compete with a rock drummer if you want a clean tone. They're not great for clean headroom. The AC15 will give you a lot more clean headroom, but by the time you're getting up to like, you know, your average rock drummer who are not quiet, you know, if you're playing in a smaller group with a quiet drummer, maybe you'd get a clean tone, but if you really want clean headroom, I would say make sure you're going to be mic'd, or you should bump up to something like an AC30. Will they compete gig-wise with a drummer if you want drive? It still depends on your drummer, and it still depends on the venue. But I will say that these are up at about gig volume now. I don't know that I'd ever really turn these up louder at a gig. I can't think of a gig that I would turn them up louder at, because they're pretty loud. Now for this, I'm not using pedals. I'm going to use a Gibson Sg. This one's loaded with Lust for Tone 61 Lustbuckers. So we're going to hear it with humbuckers up at gig volume so that you can get an idea of what it sounds like when the amps really fill out. All right, folks, which ones do you like best? Let us know in the comments. I honestly don't have a preference between the two. I think they each do some things really well that the other one doesn't. They each fall short of the mark a little bit in some ways that I'm not crazy about. I wish the AC10 had a little bit more articulation. I don't necessarily mind the digital reverb. I think the digital reverb sounds fine, but if you need your amp to do a little bit more, that's not the amp for you. Obviously, if you need clean headroom, it's probably not the amp for you either. Again, clean headroom talking about volume-wise. It has a really nice clean tone, but it's quiet. AC15, I love that it has spring reverb. I love that it has the tremolo. I like that it has the classic top cut and the 2 channels. I don't like that it sounds pretty thin and brittle at lower volumes, and the speaker of this is pretty well broken in at this point too. Again, I also think this one could benefit from just having, I don't want to say speaker upgrade because it's a greenback, but having a different speaker that's more Vox voiced that might give you a bit more body at a lower volume. But I think they each have great applications, possibly as gigging amps, definitely as home studio amps. Let us know, do you own either of these amps or both of them? What do you think? I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.